So where's Rick this morning? I guess.
Oh no.
All right. So yeah, we're going. This is the last chapter on Gideon, and so why do people sometimes say to others who experience success, "Don't let it go to your head"?
Stay humble.
Because
That euphoria only lasts a very short time.
yeah. Why do you think success or popularity change a person in a negative way?
Almost every time.
Yeah, why is that? Well,
They think they did it.
yeah. All right. Well, I'll read Rick's part here. So many people live in inconsistent lives, and inconsistency causes all kinds of problems. Problems both for the inconsistent person and for those who observe his inconsistency. All kinds of guilt and problems arise for the person who lives up and down contradictory life. If a person is up one day and down the next day, achieving one week and failing the next week, feeling pleased one moment and displeased the next moment, the person faces a miserable life and causes misery for others. The sense of failure and guilt of coming short is always within the heart of an inconsistent person. And tragically, while the inconsistent person is living in a failure or sin and evil, he is influencing others to fail or commit sin and evil. And I'm going to read the last part of the last chapter because it does impact part of what is going on in this chapter. So the men of Ephraim joined the battle. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim with this message: come down to intercept the Midianites and take control of the water courses ahead of them as far as Bethabara and the Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they took control of the water courses as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. They captured Oreb and Zeb, the two princes of Midian. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb while they were pursuing the Midianites. They brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. Again, the Ephraim was a rather large tribe. They were known to be good warriors, and so that's kind of where they're at. And so there's there's a lot of reading, Steve. So
That's what I get for missing last week.
okay.
The men of Ephraim said to him, why have you done this to us, not calling us when you went to fight against the Midianites? And they argued with him violently. So he said to them, what have I done now compared to you? Is not the gleaning of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God handed over to you to you Oreb and Zeb, the two princes of Midian. Was I able what was I able to do compared to you? When he said this, their anger against him subsided. Gideon and the 300 men came to the Jordan and crossed it. They were exhausted, but still in pursuit. He said to the men of Succoth, please give some loaves and bread to the people who are following me, because they are exhausted. For I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. But the princes of Succoth asked, are Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hands, that we should give bread to your army? Gideon replied, very well. When the Lord has handed Zebah and Zalmunna over to me, I will trample your flesh on thorns and briars from the wilderness. He went from there to Penuel and asked the same thing from them. The men of Penuel answered just as the men of Succoth had answered. He also told the men of Penuel, when I return in peace, I will tear down this tower. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and with them was an army of about 15,000 men, who were all those left in the entire army of the Kedemites. Those who had been killed were 120,000 warriors. Gideon traveled on the caravan route east of Nobah and Jogbehah and asked their army while the army was unsuspecting. Oh, and attacked their army while the army was unsuspecting. Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them. He captured these two kings of Midian and routed the entire army. Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres. He captured a youth from the men of Succoth and interrogated him. The youth wrote down for him the names of 77 princes and the elders of the Succoth. Then he went to the men of Succoth and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna. You taunted me about them, saying, 'Are Zebah and Zalmunna now in your power, that we should give bread to your exhausted men?' So he took the elders of the city, and he took some thorns and briars from the wilderness, and he disciplined the men of Succoth with them. He also tore down their tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. He asked Zebah and Zalmunna, 'What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?' They were like you," they said. "Each resembled the son of a king." So he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you." Then he said to Jeroth, his firstborn, "Get up and kill them." The youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid because he was still a youth. Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Get up and kill us yourself, for a man is judged by his strength." So Gideon got up, killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on their necks of their camels. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you as well as your sons and your grandsons, for you delivered us from the power of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Then he said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Everyone give me an earring from his plunder." Now the enemy had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. They said, "We agree to give them." So they spread out a mantle, and everyone threw an earring from his plunder on it. The weight of the gold earrings he requested was about 43 pounds of gold. In addition to the crescent ornaments and the ear pendants, the purple garments of the kings of Midian, and the chains on the necks of their camels. Gideon made an ephod from all of this and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. Then all the Israelites prostituted themselves with it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. So Midian was subdued before the Israelites, and they were no longer a threat. The land was peaceful 40 years during the days of Gideon. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, son of Joash, went back to live at his house. Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, since he had many wives. His concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Then Gideon, son of Joash, died at a ripe old age, and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. When Gideon died, the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. The Israelites did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the power of the enemies around them. They did not show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good he had done for Israel.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Any initial comments or thoughts?
I'm impressed that guy remembered the names of 77 princes.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of plundering.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if Gideon remembered the name of his 71 sons.
Right.
They're all named George Foreman.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah,
thinking
yeah.
of that, Gary.
So the men of Ephraim were from a large, important tribe. Why did they feel snubbed and insulted?
Because they weren't involved. They weren't, included.
Yeah, and I guess they didn't know that even if they had been in the big army at the start, God would have whittled it down to the 300. So
Well, and even in today's world, sometimes you feel you're not humble if you, it's not humbling for you, I guess, if you're doing something and somebody asks you questions about it. What do you mean? Why are you asking me these questions? Whether they've been defeated or not, or whatever, I've asked you to do this. That's what I expect is you to do it. So it is a little frustrating.
Everybody wants to be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens, the room where it happens.
Yeah.
The reference there.
Yeah.
Hamilton.
Yeah. So how does Gideon handle their complaints?
Plans a party for him.
Well, kind of had a party for him, but it also,
He reminded them.
Yeah, it was not the kind of party they would probably want.
no, what he said, well, he really kind of complimented them, I guess. He didn't say, he said, so what have I done now compared to you? Is not the gleaming of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abzar? So remember, they brought the heads of those guys that they killed
Yeah.
and handed them over to him. So he said, well, he's just kind of minimizing what God had done, or what they implied that he'd done, and kind of told them, well, what you guys did was great, killing these Oreb and Zeb. So after the Ephraimites, Gideon runs into more detours in hot pursuit of Zebah and Zalmunna. Why do you think the Succoth and Peniel refuse him food? So that Gideon and his 300 men came to the Jordan and crossed it. They were exhausted, but still in pursuit. He said to the men of Succoth, when they were there, please give us some loaves of bread to the people who are following me. 300 men, but they're exhausted for pursuing these two kings of Midian. But they said, have you beat these guys yet? Are they now in your hands that we should give bread to your army?
Sounds like they were still afraid of the kings that they're used to.
Yeah. So they kind of like, so these other, the Sukkoth people were Israelites, and they were kind of traitors to their own kind by not supporting them against the enemy. They just didn't want to be involved, right? They probably were afraid. So
It's back in the old day when you're practicing and you think you need a water break and the coaches wouldn't give it to you because you hadn't worked hard enough yet. You haven't finished the job.
yeah.
You got to stay hungry or thirsty, right?
Yeah. So why do you think such detours and criticisms were doing to the insides of Gideon? What do you think kept him from turning back and forgetting about those two guys?
Because they were the kings. Got to get rid of them, right? Subdue
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Probably for peace in the region, right?
Yeah. And, God promised him victory. So I think he's still working under that vein. But, what's the difference between how Gideon acts towards God before the battle and after? I guess that might be a little soon for this question. No, well, let me move on. Why did Gideon return to Succoth after he had conquered the Midianites? So he captured youth from the men of Succoth and interrogated him. The youth wrote down all 77 princes. Then he went to the men of Succoth and said, here are Zebeth and Zalmunna. You taunted me about them. saying, "Are Zebah and Zalmunna now in your power that we should give bread to your exhausted men?" So here they are. They're kind of like, "Are you going to give us bread now?" But so he took the elders of the city. He took some thorns and briars from the wilderness, and he
Whipped them.
whipped them. Yeah. He also tore down the tower and killed the men of the city. So should have given them the bread, you know. But why do you think? What do you think has changed in Gideon from when he hid in the wine press to what he just did in these verses here, from 1 through 21? Anything changed in Gideon?
Maybe more vengeful.
More vengeful, yeah, feeling more empowered.
Make a point about doing it in the point of their power or their recognition.
Yeah, he might kind of be getting close to on the verge of being kind of puffed up with his own importance. Forgetting, so you know, you kind of wonder early on when he was going into these battles, he was consulting God, but it's kind of you look here on well, what should I do about these guys in Succoth and Phanuel? He took no counsel from God on these either. He just decided himself that he was going to okay, so you weren't going to help us, so we're going to take your lives. So okay. So what do the Israelites want to do for Gideon after the Lord saves Israel through him? In verse 22.
Make him the king.
Yeah. So why is this offer misguided, especially in light of the statement, for you, Gideon, have saved us from the hand of Midian? How does Gideon respond in verse 23? And that what is an ephod should be the next question, not the,
It was God, not me.
yeah. But then this is kind of odd here. So when he says, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you, the Lord will rule over you. Then he said, let me make a request to you. Everyone give me an earring from his plunder. Now the enemy had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So in this case, he's not going to be king, but he is going to kind of tax them.
Or take a tithe,
Take a tithe, yes. Yeah.
however you want to view that.
Commentary calls that he leans into the world of idolatry.
Yeah, that's kind of in the next paragraph or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the other thing that happens here is by the volume that comes from just an earring, you get the kind of an idea of how big the deal this was.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of weight for an earring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those guys, the Ishmaelites must have had long earlobes, you know,
Yeah.
for the weight of that earring. But yeah, I mean that's a lot, and he
So does 26 imply the folks gave more than just the earrings? Since
Yeah.
there's crescent ornaments and purple garments and the chains from the camel, so it looks like they gave more than what he requested.
right. And he might have applied that too.
Well, the
So-
purple garments are worth a lot of money also.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has been for a long time. Remember that one, what was that woman in the New Testament that
Yeah.
Do you know why the purple garments are valuable?
Taken from a plant that's kind of probably
Yeah,
not that prominent.
it's a very, very rare,
Yeah.
and the amount of the material. I think it's from actually some kind of a shellfish. It's actually they get such a tiny amount. It's very, very difficult to get.
Yeah, this lady you're talking about, she actually was able to create the dye that created the color purple.
You mean the movie?
No, in the Bible that
Okay.
Dwight's referring to. I don't even know what movie, but in the Bible it talks about her in the New Testament.
Yeah,
You don't know the movie The Color Purple?
Oh,
with Oprah. Was Oprah in that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you need to go
Yeah.
watch that movie.
Is she still in the country?
Yeah, I don't know who. Um, okay, so I guess that next question that should have been here: what is an ephod?
An ephod is a device that they use to discern the truth or future.
Yeah, so actually, how God that really originally was the priestly garment that the priest wore.
Yeah.
So I don't know why he made the ephod, and it had 12 stones on it, each one representing a different tribe of Israel. And you remember that David asked for the priest ephod when he had a request to God, and I think one pastor was online. I think it might have been. Was saying that, well, maybe the jewels, when somebody asked God a question and the priest wasn't there, possibly that God maybe through the making the different jewels shine differently or something, God may have given the answer to prayer. But anyway, that's what David consulted the ephod quite.
Yeah. Yeah, I think actually the 12 jewels they spin. So it's not static. And so you could run your hand across it and they spin, and supposedly the way they would end up is the answer to the question they would ask.
Yeah, something like So it's all kind of strange. I mean, what he's doing here, he gets gold from the people from the spoils of war, which normally the victors or the people that were participating in the victory usually got to take some spoils unless God told them not to, but we don't see that in this instance. But then he's not wearing it necessarily. He just kind of puts it on an altar and makes it like an idol or something. So how could something meant to give God the glory for his deliverance then become an object of worship?
Well, isn't that
And
kind of
all
the whole issue? Some churches don't put any depictions, idols in their churches because they don't want them to become the reason for worship. Even today, that's
Yeah. So then all Israel prostrated themselves with it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. So it became like an idol. So how could Gideon resist the Israelites' invitation to rule in place of God, yet worship an ephod in God's stead? Was he greedy, short-sighted, losing his zeal for the Lord? What do you think? What was going on in Gideon's mind here? I think one commentary, while in this worshiping ephod, did become a snare to Gideon and his whole household, but he turned down being the king, yet by getting all this gold and plunder from all the people, he was living like a king. He didn't want the title, but he was living like a king. And that he took all this gold and everything, and he stopped. He had one wife at the start, but then he ends up with however many it was, and had concubines. So he allowed the culture to influence him. Like I said, he became like a king, but he didn't call himself that title.
He's a representative of a sinner himself, and Gideon also wanted, because of his victories, his conquering, he wanted the spoils. He may have said, this is all through God, but the materialistic side of him, he wanted to benefit from those things.
Yeah. So it's kind of more back to what we
I
were talking.
almost think originally it would have been a, reminder maybe to him and his family of God's victory, right, over these people. But then over time, right, it then becomes the object of worship as opposed to God, right? I don't think his intentions originally were bad intentions, right?
No, I would agree with that. Yeah. But,
Yeah,
You know, and are all these things better off in the hands of one person as opposed to spread among the nation? I mean, there's another way to look at it, right? I don't know.
and the commentary I have says the concept of the putting the ephod together was his intention was to make it the point of worship. So they were worshiping this thing, and that the term ephod actually included the garment. It was all one thing. It was the plate and the garment, but this was not. This was different. And there are a couple places in the Bible where this is done. And so to say an ephod is something that the Israelites use is kind of a generalization versus the intended use. So it can be good or bad.
yeah. Consequences. So again, the question: do we have something that maybe was made to glorify God, but has become an ephod or like an idol in our lives?
I think sometimes as a Christian, your knowledge becomes an ephod. Look how much I know about the Bible. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know God's heart, but I look at how much I know. Right?
I think it represents here too, and it comes cyclical throughout the entire Bible. Another study I'm in right now is, which we've done many times, I know, Dwight, is Exodus. But it's not only that part, but it's about what we forget.
Yeah.
Where we're at when we start and why we're doing it, and our devotion to God and our devotions in ourselves to knowing that we're sinners, and confession, and the restoration of ourselves. And then as we get along down the road, we begin, and this country is really into that. We have really forgot about what, the forefathers brought to us with, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and with God in mind. And, and that's being forgotten completely. So when you talk about Gideon, you talk about where we've been in this country and where we're at. We've taken the God out of about everything we can touch, whereas at one time God was involved in everything we touched.
Yeah.
So
Well, you read about the early day, or even as they were putting together the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and even in early years in Congress, that would always open in prayer if there's a
right,
big bill or something that they were having to consider. They prayed to God. So I mean, in Congress before they acted on some things. So we certainly don't do that anymore. We've done everything we can to take God out of our government, our lives, out of our schools.
In God we trust.
Right.
Don't hear that.
Well, now when they do pray in Congress, sometimes it's a Christian pastor, sometimes it's a Muslim, sometimes it's, um, you know,
Iman, yeah. So
yeah, it's just they're trying to be that universal rather than recognize God for, who He is and the power that He has.
right. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, so many even heard so many times, well, what it's all the same God, right? No,
Right. Hmm.
no, no, it's not. But anyway. But, so how many sons did Gideon have?
71, at
Yeah,
least. I would say. I would say
yeah,
I'm not sure he knows how many sons he had.
yeah. They probably had some daughters too. What happens to Israelites yet again after their judge dies?
They fall away.
Yeah, actually,
Oh,
there's three things they did, but that's basically it. So, and they're underlined. So they actually went into the Israelites turned and prostrated themselves with the Baals and made Baal Bereth their god. They did not remember the Lord their God who had delivered them from the power of the enemies, and they did not show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good he had done for Israel. And again, I think one of my commentaries too, Gary, mentioned the passage in Exodus on how the Israelites so soon forgot what God had done for them. Uh, oh, this was that question. What happened? Three things happened when Israel when Gideon died. So just from this passage, what do we learn from Gideon about the dangers of God-given success? How is it possible to make the same mistakes today?
to believe that the power given you is your own.
Anything else from this?
Well, to be a narcissist, you yourself are giving yourself all the credit for whatever is happening is positive that you think is grandiose, and and the people that are around you are it's because of you, and you know for sure that's not true. Uh, it's through God and the Holy Spirit that you are granted anything that happens, and in giving thanks uh, and for that, but saying, "Well, it's me. It's all me." Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I don't have too many takeaway. Oh, this. What are some of your strengths? When have you experienced the temptation of taking pride in your strengths? Assuming they're God-given strengths.
I think being as a sinner, that's very difficult. I think it makes us internally feel good when we think that we've contributed to something, and without, and forgetting to thank God to give you that strength, to give you that ability, to whatever. It's not an easy thing for people of the flesh to do. I think we see, I mean, you see it in awards bank. I mean, I guess you see it many, many times where people are receiving lots of accolades and they forget the one reason why they're getting the accolade.
Yeah. What makes self-reliance prideful? What does it say to God when you choose to depend on yourself instead of Him? Okay, just had a few things that I pulled out of this. So we are to seek peace with all men, seek to avoid controversy among people, especially among God's people. The spirit of peace is to be cultivated by believers, and peace is to be maintained as much as possible. When differences, divisions, and strife arise, we are to do what we can to make peace. So, kind of in contrary to how Gideon handled the conflict with the Sukkoths and those other people.
Well, he eliminated the conflict,
Yeah, he did. He did.
right?
Yeah. Being inconsistent, living for God one day and living a worldly, unholy life the next day is one of the worst offenses against God that can be committed. An inconsistent life destroys our testimony and affects other lives, often leading others into sin and evil. But Warren Wiersbe, and again, I'm still trying to think what that book, that Bible that he wrote, or the translation that he wrote, because I know at Christ Church we studied part of that. I think Windhorn kind of led something on that. No, not Windhorn, but
Does Steve do that, Alberton?
yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gideon missed a great opportunity to bring reformation and perhaps revival to the land. He had torn down his father's idols, but there are many households in Israel that were still devoted to Baal, and those idols needed to be destroyed as well. The great victory over Midian gave Gideon good reason to call the nation back to the Lord in obedience to his law. But instead of the occasion for God's glory, he used it for his profit, and the nation eventually into sin once again. What caused Gideon's spiritual decline? Wiersbe thinks it was pride. You don't find Gideon honoring the Lord or calling the people together to make a new covenant to obey the Lord. Gideon started out as a servant, but now he was an important celebrity. The result was decline for him, his family, and his nation. It is interesting and instructive to contrast Abraham and Gideon in the decisions they made after their respective victories. Abraham took nothing for himself, but made sure that others received their share of the spoils. He especially refused to take anything from the heathen king of Sodom. Instead, Abraham fellowshiped with Melchizedek, king of Salem, a type of our Lord Jesus Christ. And in all that he said and did, Abraham gave glory to God of heaven and earth. And we don't see much of that going on with Gideon. So I think that's all I had on that. So, any other comments on the passage or?
Oh, question, Dwight. Do you see any parallels between today's world and the nation of Israel and everyone outside of Israel with what's going on right now and where Israel's asking for help? And in some places that may be happening and in some places it's not. Is that parallel to this?
I don't know. I mean, Netanyahu, I don't think has totally rejected God or anything yet, but so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That's probably one of those deep conversations because it's not a simple issue. The thing that strikes me about this passage is, like it does with a lot of Old Testament stories, is there's so much violence. I mean, a lot of these, uh, defeats are just one lines that say they wiped everybody out. If you were to elaborate on that, it's ugly, man. It's really ugly. And I know a lot of people today, a lot of young people today are kind of educated in this violence and they say, well, how could this have been right? Right? Just leave them alone. All gods are the same God. So why are you doing this? And so that's a tough one, I think.
Yeah, I see a lot of parallelism. When I look at Hamas and their ultimate goal is to destroy anyone that believes in God or Jesus Christ, and they're going to murder them and kill them, and you want to negotiate with people that their ultimate goal is to kill you. I think it's hard to do negotiation when you know what their bottom line is they're not feeling that way at all. It's not like it was, last year. I mean, this has been going on for thousands of years. If you follow back to Hamas or Hezbollah or any of those particular tribes, it's been going on. It's very similar in a lot of ways. Is that when the nation of Israel reaches out, there's a decision that has to be made by those that believe in Jesus Christ and God. If you're actually going to be in support of that, or if you're going to stand at the sidelines and say, well, I'll wait and see what happens, and then I'll make whoever the winner is. I'll jump in and say, yeah, I'll be on your side. There's some risks to be taken, and some are willing to take it, some are not.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what the Sukkar and the other group did too. They said, well, we're just going to wait and see if you win. And
Right.
then we'll come alongside you. And but I think what we have trouble understanding, but I think God's shown it over and over. If you allow the Canaanites and their worship of Baal to continue to be in your nation, and if you tolerate that type of abhorrent behavior and the thing that they actually hate you and they want to kill you, they don't believe in your God, they will end up having a negative impact upon you and your family, and you'll end up maybe compromising your beliefs, your relationship with God, in order to live alongside them, rather than having them make the compromise to live with you. So
Yeah, and I think that's the point. That's the point, that you can't have a foot on both sides of the fence and be worshiping the one true God.
No, I totally agree. I often think about having a daughter that goes to a concert and never comes home, and is attacked because they are Jewish or because they believe in one God. And it doesn't matter your age, or your gender or whatever. If you're a part of that group, they're going to murder you.
yeah.
And so the definitions are clear. It's where we make the water a little muddy and I agree with what Greg just said. I think, if you are a believer in God, you have to take that point of view. And it isn't easy sometimes, because it like Jesus said, you're going to be a disciple. It's going to be